My beliefs are this: you cannot teach love without feeling love. So many people believe that love is something that is like a principle that can be intellectually taught. I don't believe that's the case at all. Love is something that comes from your heart. It is an emotion in itself. A person, a child, cannot be taught to do something loving without there being an emotion in the child of wanting to actually be loving. And this is where I feel most of our teaching fails, because we are not actually, when a religious society, for example, teaches their children to follow some kind of path, they're not teaching them love, they're teaching them what I would call rote learning through the intellect. They are also teaching them that if they break away from the particular faith that their parents were in, that they'll be, punished for such a deed. Usually excommunicated is usually the result. Now, those teachings are a lack of love. They're not love. They're a lack of love, because a love would accept, I would accept you choosing to do anything you wish, with the exception of one thing, and that is if you chose to harm me, I wouldn't accept it. I'd just fall over and say, do it again. I would actually, generally I'd try to want to ask you why you did it. Is there something that I offended you with or something? And then if that wasn't the case and you still wanted to do it, I'd say, well, I'd try to walk away. Now, if I couldn't walk away, if I couldn't get away from you, then I would sit there and take it, to be honest. So in other words, if I was in prison and I couldn't get away, then I would sit there and take it. Because I could not certainly act unlovingly in return back to you and do the same.
But you've often told people in your company that they are not acting lovingly. That's an intellectual judgment on your part.
It's not a judgment, because a judgment is an emotion. So I'm not judging them.
No.
I don't feel that they are lesser than I am, because there are some times when I act unlovingly, right? And
are you not getting them? Are you not wanting them to live up to an expectation that you have of a certain code of behaviour in that situation?
No, because the feeling I have is I don't have any intellectual expectation of them. What I'm doing though is I'm trying to help them become aware of what loving or unloving behaviour is. And I feel the only way you can actually do that is to say, see what you just did then, that was unloving for this reason. Does that make sense? So I'm trying to help them in their mind put together a linkage between what's unloving behaviour and at least for them to consider that might have been unloving for this particular logical reason. What they do with that, I feel, is then up to themselves. Like it's none of my business actually what they do with that information. I'm just hopefully and many of these people have asked me to do that, of course. So I'm doing that because they've asked me to do it. They ask me for some feedback, I give them some feedback, but I'm not expecting them to live up to what I'm saying. What I would like to see, but it's not an expectation, what I would like to see is for them to get to the underlying emotional reason why they chose that behaviour, whatever the reason was. And usually the reason is fear-based, or a resistance to grief, or a resistance to fear, or a resistance to anger. Generally that's there's the primary resistances, if you like.
Should you be allowing them to just express their free will?
They're allowed to, as far as I'm concerned, they're completely allowed to express their free will. They are allowed to be unloving if they desire.
What about children? When you're raising children, where do you draw the line between them expressing their free will and you restricting them because of what they're doing to their...
Well, I draw the line with everybody the same as I draw the line with children. It's the same line, and this is the line. When a person is out of harmony with ethical behaviour, in other words, when the person is treating another person in a way that they themselves would not like to be treated, then they are out of harmony with the primary viewpoint of ethics. Now, I feel under those circumstances, that is the time when we must speak up. We must say something, because a person is not being ethical in their relationship with another person. And that applies whether they're a child or an adult. In addition, if a person continues to act in an unloving manner towards another person, and particularly if that manner becomes violent, then the person who becomes violent needs to be restricted, whether they are a child or whether they're an adult. They need to have the same restriction. I don't believe there's a need to be a different restriction. Of course, the amount of power needed to handle the restriction will depend upon how big the person is.
So how does a parent restrict a child from just yelling out some horrible names to their sister?
Well, what I've found is the best form of restriction for any person to engage in is just to hold the child every time they act out of harmony with love. Just to hold the child and just restrict them from they're allowed to speak or do anything, but take them into a room or whatever and just hold the child and just talk to them about why you're holding them. And now to do that, a parent's got to be pretty engaged. The parent's got to be pretty connected with themselves. They're not doing it out of rage, and the parent isn't doing it out of rage or anger or any injustice or anything like that. They're just doing it because the person was unloving, right? And they just hold the child and let the child have their tantrum for as long as it takes. Now, sometimes I've seen it take a couple of hours. You let the child have their tantrum and you just physically restrict the child until the child gets into the grief associated with their behaviour. When they do that, you can feel the change in the child, where the child acknowledges their own unloving behaviour. But the other question I would ask myself is, if these are children and I'm the parent, I must have a look at the imbalances that are occurring in the family that are causing one child to express violently towards another. So, for example, if a male child is verbally abusing a female child, then I would have to firstly look at my own actions towards the boy and my own actions towards the girl. I would look at my own actions towards the boy and going, okay, have my actions shown him that he's allowed to verbally abuse women and get away with it? So that's the first thing I'd ask myself. Now, if the answer to that was no, I have never acted in that way and I don't even feel that way, then I would ask myself, do I have a favouritism towards women? Because if I have a favouritism towards women, my child will feel the imbalance of love coming out of me towards his sister, my daughter, in comparison to him, my son. And therefore he will express that generally in rage if he doesn't know how to feel that emotionally, if he doesn't know how to grieve. So what I would do then is I go, okay, do I have a favouritism towards the daughter in comparison to the son? Or does any other member of the family who's an adult in particular have the same favouritism? If they do, we need to address that emotion, because that emotion creates an imbalance that demonstrates to him that he is lesser in our eyes than she is, which would naturally cause him to react in an angry manner. That all being said, I would address those emotions and I would explain all of that to him, but I would still hold him, right, until he's realised that his behaviour towards his sister was unloving.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Now, when I do that, I'm not being violent towards him, but I am restricting him from expressing his unloving behaviour and damaging another, and also damaging himself when he does so. Now, of course, if the person is grown up, then I would have to perhaps restrict them by putting them in a location rather than restricting them physically. Obviously it depends upon how big the person is as to how well I can carry out that piece of advice. But I do not believe that a child is any different than an adult when it comes to the expression of violence. So in other words, whoever the person is, whether a child or an adult, we need to restrict the expression of violence. Whenever violence is expressed, there is always going to be damaging results unless there is a restriction placed upon the violent person. However, I also need to look at how has their violence been triggered by my general attitude. So for example, many gay people have expressed violence towards others, and many people have expressed violence towards gay people. Many heterosexual people have experienced violence towards gay people. You can see, after many centuries and millennia of actually gay people being treated in a violent and deprecating manner, that there's going to be some kind of rebellious kickback for that kind of treatment. And so it's logical if we see somebody acting out of harmony with love, it's logical for us to question, how have I contributed to their pain that causes them to be out of harmony with love? And it's very logical for me to ask myself that question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that it requires both of those actions if we're truly going to heal the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.